Okay, it's Revelations 18, 1 through 8. After I saw another angel coming down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illumined by his splendor. He called out with a mighty voice, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. It has become dwelling place of demons, a haunt of every foul spirit, a haunt of every foul bird, a haunt of every foul and hateful beast. For all the nations have fallen from the wine of the wrath of her prostitution, and the kings of the earth have engaged in sexual immorality with her, and the merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxury." Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, so that you do not take part in her sins, and so that you do not share in her plagues. For her sins are heaped high as heaven. God has remembered her iniquities. Render her as herself has rendered, and repay her double for her deeds. Mix a double dose for in the cup she mixed. As she glorified herself and lived luxuriously, give her a like measure of torment and grief. Since in her heart she says, 'I rule as queen, I am no widow, and I will never see grief.' Therefore her plagues will come in a single day, pestilence and mourning and famine, and she will be burned with fire. For mighty is the Lord God who judges her."
We're still in Revelation, and the reason that we're in Revelation is because for years, before Moses, before Abraham, there were belief in other and stories of other gods. And those stories often involved really angry, warlike gods. Many of them even talked about the world even being created out of rage, out of anger. And a lot of those gods are depicted as gods that really detest the people of the earth. Our God isn't that way. Our God is not that way. But stories like Revelation have been used to depict a God that is one of those pagan gods, but not the God that we follow. And it's going to take us a little bit longer to go through this. We've got about 8 more weeks. We've been at this for a while. And if I will feel like I've accomplished something if we walk away from this and we think to ourselves, God's not hateful. God does not hate us. God is not waiting for us to screw up. God is there to help us through this journey of our lives and to help us through. And God's anger is toward an evil force, but not the people that it affects. If that's what we walk away from, I will have done that. And you will be able to win any arguments if you're in the bar, and as it always happens at bars, Revelation comes up. And you can say, God's not an angry God. And you can say, well, how did you know? And you can say, because my pastor made us go through the entire darn thing. So that's how you'll know. So this is good weaponry for you as well. Now, I just want to kind of go through some of this, and then I want to talk about some things. But it starts out, after I saw this, another angel came down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illumined by his splendor. He called out with a mighty voice, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great." Now, this kind of sets the tone for what we're about to read here, because many times in Revelation, when something heavenly happens, John likes to describe it as thunder and earthquakes and all of this kind of stuff. But right now he's saying it's illumination, it's splendor. It's a very loving thing here. It's a very caring thing that's happening. And he wants to set that straight by the message that's coming down, because what you're about to hear doesn't sound that great, but we want to identify the right roles in this. The role of God playing in this right now is loving and caring, and the announcements that's coming from God are ones of greatness. And it says, Babylon, Babylon is fallen. Now remember, Babylon is kind of a nameplate for any empire, any dictatorial government, any body of government that is repressive and hurting other people, any body, dictatorship, those kind of things. When they thought of Babylon in the first century, they thought of the true Babylon when Israelites were exiled. But the people reading this today in the first century would think of Rome, that Rome was their Babylon. It's just that you gave that name Babylon to anything that was that oppressive. And it meant any empires that were yet to come as well. We're continuing reading this, and we know that throughout history and throughout our lives, we have seen dictators and all this kind of stuff, and we've seen governments being abusive and all this stuff. We're talking about all of that stuff. And so that's what he's talking about, but he's saying that it is fallen. It has become a dwelling place of demons, a haunt for every foul spirit, a haunt for every foul bird, a haunt for every foul and hateful beast. For all the nations have fallen. John's really trying to spell it out that anything evil has become part of Rome. That it has been a mecca for every harmful being has met in Rome. And that's what it's become. For all nations have fallen from the wine of the wrath of her prostitution, and the kings of the earth have engaged in sexual immorality with her, and merchants of the earth have grown rich from the power of her luxury. Now again, just like when we're talking about Babylon being the nameplate to describe stuff, so is sexual immorality and prostitution. It's a nameplate for abuse. Back then, the pagan worship, part of many pagan worships did involve sexual trafficking. It did involve people being abused, truly being abused. And so just like when we use Babylon to describe Rome, we're describing prostitution and sexual immorality just means people being taken advantage of, people being harmed. It has nothing to do with loving relationships of any kind or anything like that. They are talking about abuse. Just like when they mention Babylon, they're talking about people that have been their rights have been taken away, they have been abused. The acts of this have been abused, and then it talks about that the merchants of the earth have grown rich from this. People have climbed the ladder of success by stepping truly on other people's backs. And that's what this is all about. Rome's power is because of the abuse of other people. And that's what they're talking about there. And it says, "Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, 'Come out of her, my people, so that you do not take part in her sins, and so that you do not share in her plagues. For her sins have heaped high as heaven, and God has remembered her iniquities.'" Now again, if you haven't been here for a little bit, her means city. It means government. It means empire. Like you would call a ship or a boat she. When they're referring to she, they're referring in this case to Rome. They're referring to Babylon. They're referring to empires. They're using a feminine name to it, but they are talking about the entire city, the entire population, the entire government, and everybody that is gaining from the harm of other people. And it says, "Render to her," give to her as she herself has given, and repay her double for her deeds. Mix a double dose for her in the cup she has mixed. Now, this is something that, again, we have to put ourselves in the first century to truly understand this, because when we put ourselves in the first century, when it talks about God judging people, it's not always talking about that God is waiting for you to screw up or wanting to condemn, okay? You're wearing a greenish shirt. Now, by me saying that, I've judged what he's wearing. I've observed what he's wearing. Now, in this case, that's what John's talking about when he talks about God judging this. God has seen this happen. And we've learned that God deals with evil two ways. The most way is that he lets it just play out and implode on itself. Other ways is when God intervenes when things get too crazy. Revelation is kind of seeing that both. The second coming is definitely the intervening, but first he's letting evil just implode among itself. And they're telling those churches in the first century that this is what's going to happen. Because the church in the first century, they followed Jesus Christ, and by following Jesus Christ, there was a word that sometimes we take for granted. We hear it in songs, we hear it on cards, we see it all over the place. It means some different degrees to us. But to them, the word love was a way of life. It was revolutionary. It was the way that they were going to live out their life. They were not in a world of evil and a world of hate your enemy. They were not going to do that. They were not going to fight violence with violence. They were not going to fight hatred with hatred. They were starting something brand new. Today we use the term evangelical. And when you hear an evangelical in the United States, it has a different meaning than it does in other parts of the world. In the United States, many times it means a political church or what's the word when the churches that you pray and you get stuff? Prosperity gospel. Thank you for that blank stare that you gave me. That helped me right through. I'm just glad you're awake. So, but we think of when evangelicals as people that are telling you that you're sinners or hating and all of this kind of stuff. But to the early church, as in places in Europe and stuff, evangelical just means celebrating and sharing the love of Jesus Christ. And the earliest churches, the way that they did that is they would study the Word of God, they would pray together, they would share community, but they would also help their neighbors, regardless of who they were. They would make sure that people were helped. It involves things like social justice. It involved things like, social justice now has a word that of itself that seems to have sent it to another political side. But in the early church, that was just all part of following Christ. You fed the poor. You advocated for people that were being abused. You gave people health care. You gave people knowledge. You increased wisdom. You did all of that stuff. To them, that's what evangelical was. And it was revolutionary. It was something that Rome didn't like, and it was something that people had never seen before. And what John's trying to remind them of is the same thing that Christ reminded them. You spend that time in love, you will suffocate evil. Think of love as being taking the oxygen away from a fire. The more that you focus on love and the message of Christ, the more that suffocates evil. Evil cannot stand that. A hero of mine, Fred Rogers, once asked a professor of his in theology, what is the one thing that evil cannot tolerate, cannot stand? And his professor said, forgiveness. Because that is an action of love. When we fight evil with evil, when we fight violence with violence, we are feeding evil. We are feeding that. But when we take evil around us and we say, no, I'm not going to do this, when we follow Christ, who was violently attacked and gave his life for us, therefore defeating evil because he didn't feed it. The church was doing the same thing in the first century, and it's supposed to be doing the same thing now. We're supposed to be continually celebrating that love. And by doing that, when evil comes to the church, it can't breathe here because we are celebrating love. I'm not standing up here telling you got to hate people. I'm not standing up here imposing violence. I'm not trying to feed any lustful behaviors or anything like that. We are in a message of love. Evil cannot stand that. And it has to go somewhere else to thrive and to live. And what happens there is when you have all of these corners where there's love, evil has to recoil, and evil has to feed itself on itself. And that's the outcome of Revelation. We have taken away the oxygen from the flame by not playing the game. And evil is now dying upon itself. This is the vision that John is having. And this is what he's telling, that all of these empires throughout history, it's true of Rome, it's true of Babylon, it's true of Nazi Germany, they continue to fall on themselves. This will happen time and time again. And John is warning people to not be part of it. This is the term that I love to focus on here. Then I heard another voice from heaven saying, come out of her, my people, so that you do not take part in her sins, and so that you do not share in her plagues. This truly is God saying, my fight is not with you. But if you continue to stay with evil, you'll be part of that implosion. You'll be part of evil's downfall. Get out of there. It's like a guy standing outside of a house in the fire and saying, get out of there. Don't stay in this. It might look shiny, might feel warm for a while, might seem powerful. Get out of there because your life is here. If you stay in there, you're going to burn, you're going to fall, you're going to implode upon itself. Get out of there. This is the compassion of God. This is a God that people didn't understand at the time because they didn't have gods like this. They had gods that just said, go ahead, burn yourself up, see what I care. You're a pain in my backside. This is a God that said, I'm here to rescue you from that evil force that's hurting you. That's what this is all about. That's what Revelation is all about. The more that we can grasp that and put our heads around this compassionate God, the more we understand what Christianity is, the more we understand what Christ actually did, and the more that we understand what our role as Christians truly is in this world. It's not about hating our neighbor, it's about loving our neighbor. It's not about hating this or making villains of this, it's about sharing love with everybody. That is what suffocates it. By doing that, the church in the first century was stepping outside of evil, and they were creating an atmosphere that evil could not live in. Now, it's hard sometimes because, I don't know about you, but I've probably been in this place that God is saying, get out of there. I've probably been in there many times. Throughout my life, I have made mistakes. I followed the wrong team. I have done the wrong stuff. I have done things that I probably heard God saying, get out of there. And maybe I didn't. I've maybe mentioned this before. Have you ever heard what a vicious circle? We call it vicious circle. When I worked in human stuff, human stuff, when I worked with humans, yeah, they're the worst, by the way. No, when people call it a vicious cycle, they call it different things, but it's basically when you have something that happens or a feeling, you try to correct that, you do the wrong choices, and you continue to get bad results from it, and it seems to repeat itself over and over and over again. This is what's happening with the empire right now in Rome. This is what's happening. Eventually, within the time that this letter is being spread and the church is growing, they will see Rome fall because of this. They continue to fall amongst themselves. That's why it says, give to her what she has given out. In other words, you know the saying, what goes around comes around? It just happens that way. The greed, the lust, the power, the abuse, all of those behaviors that Rome continues to do will come back on them and fall on them. How many times have you seen powerful people get surrounded by people that they think of as their minions, but then those minions start to infight, and maybe sometimes those minions start to attack the powerful person, and they fall. This is their vicious circle. I'll help to explain it. I'm going to take you to when I was 5 years old. We went from, when I grew up in the 70s, we had, when you first started to learn how to pedal, you had a big wheel. I don't know if they even have big wheels now, but they were these small, they looked like little motorcycles. No car or person could see them. You were in danger every time that you rode on them. You were about this low to the ground, and you could drive really fast. And then you graduated to kind of an adult bike. Well, we had graduated to an adult bike. But when I was a kid, my vicious cycle probably started with fear. I was fearful of not fitting in. I was an insecure person. I was fearful of a lot of things, but not being alone was one of the fears that I had. Not having friends, when you're a kid. And we had kids that when we started riding those bicycles, we had a rule that we could ride in our driveway or we could ride on the sidewalk in our house. We could not ride on the street, and we could not ride on other people's property. We could not go very far. And the reason for that is because it was a small town. We didn't have the skills yet. But we started seeing kids riding their bikes not only in the street, but in other people's driveways, and they were so bad at riding bikes, they were riding in other people's yards. They would make those really wide turns, and they would tear apart someone's bush or something like that. And remember, they were our neighbors, and we talked to them, and they told us that the reason that they were doing that is because they were cool cats. Yeah, it's 1970s. Yeah, Cool Cats. It was like the first time that I ever experienced that feeling of a gang, you know? And the way that they did that is they rebelled and they rode their bikes on other people's lawns, you know? This was really bad stuff. So my fear of not fitting in led to me joining the Cool Cats. And I became part of this. And I got on my bike and I started riding around in the street. And I started riding in people's lawns. And I started riding in people's driveways. No regard to any boundaries of any kind or any rules or anything. I thought that I was really something, you know. If I had hair, I'd slick it back. I did have hair then. But then my father caught us, yelled at us, and grounded us. I lost my bike. I lost some freedom then. I got yelled at. I got hollered at. I got sent to my room. So I took a feeling of fear and I tried to act out on it in a quick fix way, and it had a consequence. That consequence also led to this consequence. I never felt like I was being myself. I'm not a person that likes to rebel. I'm a harmonizer. I'm a pacifist. I'm not a person that likes to shake up the rules or anything or harm other people or anything like that. So just by being in the Cool Cats, I did not feel like I was being who I was. And then now I'm grounded for doing something I didn't even really want to do. That's a vicious cycle because that behavior continues to repeat itself. Whatever we start out with, it just continues to repeat and repeat and repeat. Jump ahead to, I was about 12 or 13. Same fear, insecurity, feeling like I don't fit in. I'm in junior high, wanting to be one of the popular kids, wanting to be all that. So I joined the people that your mother warned you about. I started following truly the wrong crowd. They were the ones that everybody went, oh, they're cool, you know, all that kind of stuff. They were smoking cigarettes behind the bleachers on the football games, you know, and so I found myself in that crowd and started smoking cigarettes when I was about 12 or 13 years old, started smoking cigarettes. And then I started smoking other stuff, cigars. And I started experimenting with drink and all of that stuff. I was really not doing what I wanted to do. You see, when I was up here with fear, when I was at that age, I loved doing things like that involved imagination. I loved to write stories. I was into puppetry. I loved to create things. I loved anything that involved creativity, imagination. I could spend hours just imagining different worlds and writing stories and different situations and everything like that. But that wasn't cool. That's not what made you feel like you were fit in. So I had that fear of being alone and unpopular. So what I did is something I did not want to do. I followed the wrong crowd. And that led to harmful behaviors because if you're going to join that crowd, you're going to get in trouble with a lot of things. Teachers no longer like you. And you challenge teachers. I was a terrible, terrible, terrible student. I was one that the teachers saw me less, the principal saw me the most. I was always in detention. I was always doing stuff bad. We had police officers at our house a couple of times, and I'm only, like I said, 12 or 13 years old here. And one of the results of that is I failed 8th grade. I got held back. The results of my own actions led to me choosing wrong decisions, wrongful behaviors, and I failed. We do that. That's that vicious circle. The same vicious circle of the Cool Cats is repeating itself over and over again. And the most underlying thing there is I'm still not fixing the fear at all. I'm just taking away the happiness. You know, we do this to ourselves all the time. Whatever your vicious cycle is, we do this. We get, and most of them, truly, many times, I would bet that a vicious cycle starts with that fear, a fear of something. It could be something that's tragic happened to yourself, and sometimes it can be sadness or anger, but most of the time it's a fear of living in that and not being able to get out of that. You want a quick fix out of that. Or it's a fear of not being popular or something as basic as that. But either way, we try to do things to correct it, and we don't. And we end up harming those around us, and we end up harming ourselves. And that hurts us a lot. It's almost like when you take a job, when you take that job, you're agreeing to do a task for a pay. We do that in our jobs. We know that if we don't do the job, if we do it poorly, if we don't show up, if we're behind, supposed to be working, but we're behind the bleachers smoking, we're going to get fired from that job. You'd be amazed how many times we do that in the same agreement when the job is actually just being ourselves. We don't stick to that, and we end up firing ourselves over and over again because of our own actions. Fear is where it starts. And this sometimes happens to us personally, but it also happens communal. It's a community can fall into this same trap. There are community vicious cycles. There are times when we fear as a group of people, we fear something. Things are changing too fast in our world. Or certain people have moved into the community. Or crime is up. There's a lot of news stations and a lot of social media that really loves to ignite that fear. I don't know about you, but sometimes you'll be flipping through, and that's why they call it, what do they call it, a death scroll or whatever? What do they call it? Doom scroll. Because they know that you're going to be attracted to that fear, and they're going to try to play on that. They're going to try to build it up even more. The things you fear, it's much worse than you ever thought, and it's going to get much worse than you ever thought. And what happens is that in many of us, that leads to something similar to like populism. Now, populism started back in that term, 1700s, something like that. It started out with people of low class fighting the elite. And today, it's still kind of used in that same way. It's still used as it's us versus them. And many people will use it. Politicians will use that many times. There's populists in politics where they group people together and they say, there is a lot of things to be fearful, but I'm the solution of that. And so if we hear the world is wrong, this group is right, if you follow me, if you do what we say, if you vote for me, I will solve that problem. That's what populism is. It's the answer you want to hear to every question. To every problem, they have the answer for it. And before you even understand whether or not they can do it or fulfill it, you follow it. And that's what populism is. It also exists in churches, too. Churches have populism. That prosperity gospel that I was talking about, the fear is that you're going to die poor and that nothing's going to happen to you. You're not going to get anything you want. Well, the populism view is someone that stands up there and says, if you believe, you'll get everything you want. They're never ever talking about faith journeys or anything like that. They're talking about cars and buildings and homes and careers and parking spots and all of that kind of stuff. They're telling you that if all the things that you want to hear, all that greed and lust, that will take care. That's the short fix. And all of this, whether it is a government, whether it's a church, whatever the case, it always leads to hero worship. Now we have hero worship. It's a common saying, but I want to separate that. It's really hero worship because that's what happens in a lot of these. The politician themselves becomes the hero that people actually truly start to worship. Worship because they spend more time paying homage to that person than they do to anybody else. It happens in churches, these prosperity. Instead of worshiping God, they start to worship the pastor. They start to worship that message. They start to worship the person that's telling them, yeah, you can have that car. You deserve that car. You can take from here and put it all there because you have more faith. Whatever you want to hear, whatever they're telling you, and you start to worship that because it sounds like everything's going to save your fear of anything that's going to go wrong. But what happens when we do that is everyone falls. The person that we believe in, the politician, we find out doesn't have all the answers. They can't do everything that they promised. they're not, in many ways, honest about the things that they said. The pastor that we worshiped, how many times have we seen a scandal in some of these big mega churches where the pastor gets caught doing something naughty, falls, the entire church falls? That's what it leads to, is this hard fall. You put your faith in everything to take care of that fear. You start to worship something other than Christ. The reality happens and you have a hard fall. I can't tell you how many people in these prosperity churches, I get in America, evangelical churches, where worship of the pastor has become so much that when the pastor falls, they fall so hard, many of them cannot find their faith again. It does tremendous damage. Same with politics, same with whatever the case may be, whatever you think that this is going to be. As a community, we seem to have this herd mentality, and we get attracted to things like that. It always starts with fear. We have fear. Someone says that they can take care of it. Now, in the first church, that populism view is exactly what was happening around them. That was Rome. Rome might have annihilated you. They might have taken your land, taken you over. You might start out with a fear of them. But now that you're under their control, you fear not having their protection. Because there's people that want to eliminate Rome. There's people that want to fight Rome. There's bad people out there. Rome says over and over again, we will protect you. Rome had a lot of advancements, a lot of technology that other communities and civilizations had not seen at the time. They were definitely a superpower. And so you did want to be on their side. And many people, whether they were taken by them or just joined them, wanted to be part of that. And many people started to worship the empires. They started to, if you were an emperor, you were worshiped as a god. You were the problem solver of everything. And that's what the early church was having. John is telling them there will be a definite hard fall here, a definite hard fall. And he's saying, get out of there before that happens. Wake up. Do not be following all of this when you can pull yourself out of there. He is telling them, we stand on different ground here. Our ground is holy. We do not start out with fear. We start out with faith. And that's a different road to begin with altogether. We start out with knowing that there is something bigger than us. We start out with knowing that our God is a compassionate, caring God. We have faith in that. That's what drives us. That leads us to discipleship. We start to study the words of Christ. We start to emulate as best we can to be Christ-like to the world. We start to be that image of God's love into the world and that reflection of our worship of God back to God. That's what we are here for. That's what the early church was about. It was about that discipleship. Already, they are on a different path than what we just saw. Their discipleship leads to a self-worth. Now, I'm not talking about selfishness. There's a difference between selfishness and self-centered. Self-centered means you think that the world revolves around you. Selfish means that you just understand that you have value. The church and the people then knew that they were loved by God. They knew that Christ died for them. That gives them a sense of purpose. They knew that they had a purpose. They're already on the road of a different thing. They have no fear here. They are living in a world of love, and that brings them into the community, the church, the people around them. They knew that they were not to go out and seek enemies and to fight people and to do what evil wants them to do. They knew that they had to look at the world as a community of people that were needing to be brought to God. They were evangelical because they wanted people to know that there's a better way, not to judge them, not to scold them, not to say we're better than you are, but to say you are welcome here. That's what that new church was doing. They were creating a completely different cycle. And by doing that, they were squashing the evil of the world. Now, the thing we constantly have to ask ourselves, I don't know about you, but I have to ask myself on a weekly, maybe daily, is what cycle am I creating today? Sometimes you wake up, you see the news, you start to act out, you just start saying names about people and all that kind of stuff. Somebody cuts you off on the road, you don't want to let them merge. Your cart has a wobbly wheel. Whatever the case may be, it can set you on a trajectory. Because maybe you started the day with a little bit of fear that the things that you see out there are going to remain that way. And the people that are hurting people are just going to continue to do so. But if we start out with faith and remind ourselves that God's with us, cares for us, that God will correct us, that God walks with us, and that in the meantime, our job is not to feed the evil, but to starve it by creating love. That's the self-evaluation we have to give ourselves each and every day. That's the self-evaluation that was given to the church in the first century, and here we are today. John's still telling us, get out of there. Get out of there. Would you pray with me? Gracious and loving God, sometimes we do get into cycles. Sometimes we do get into behaviors. Help us to discern truly who it is we follow. If it's someone that promises things without the message of Christ, love, humility, help us to remember that maybe we might be on the wrong path. Help us to remember that we have value too, that we are disciples, which means we love you. We know that you love us, and we know that we are called to love our neighbor. Help us to stay on that path. Love God, love yourself, love your neighbor. In Jesus' name, Lord, we pray. Amen.